Why is this vendor's compliance cert dated after their contract was signed? I asked, tapping the corner of my monitor like I was trying to rub the stupid off it. It was 6:12 p.m. on a Thursday, and I was the only soul left in compliance, again. The office fluorescents had already clicked off on their own, like even they had given up. The only light came from my dual monitors, and the flickering red exit sign reflecting in my cold cup of coffee. File on my screen should have been boring. It should have screamed dull, checked boxes, and rubber-stamped approvals. Instead, it whispered something different. Missing timestamps, temporarily waived sections, no backup documentation for vendor #347 financial solvency, or any vendor added in the past 6 weeks, really. Just a big digital shrug where due diligence was supposed to live. This wasn't a typo. It was a pattern, not the kind you knit a sweater out of. Here's where I pause to say this. 97% of folks listen to stories like this without subscribing. But if you're here, reading about my descent into bureaucratic madness and the boardroom reckoning that followed, maybe hit that subscribe button. Toss us a like. It keeps our tiny, over-caffeinated team of truth diggers running on ambition and Costco trail mix. Anyway, I didn't scream. I didn't storm into an office with a finger in the air. That's not how you last 18 years in corporate compliance. What I did do was quietly shoot a Slack to my direct manager, Greg, asking for an informal review of the new vendor files. Suggested we initiate a soft internal audit, just a light scrub. His reply, let's not sound alarms. I'm sure it's just growing pains. New systems, you know how it is. Sure, Greg, my appendix bursting is just enthusiastic digestion. I dug deeper. The same 4 fields were always either blank or altered. Each time it involved a high-dollar vendor, recently onboarded, with minimal verification. Half had address metadata that traced back to P.O. boxes in Delaware or shell offices in Singapore. All signed off by Ryan, the new VP who arrived like a human linked in post 2 months ago, full of scale, velocity, and synergy flows. I didn't hate him, not yet. I didn't know him, but his initials sat on every questionable form like a curse. I ran my findings through our legacy compliance system, which everyone hated because it was clunky but had one superpower. It logged everything. If someone backdated a form, it knew. If a signature was added out of sequence, it flagged it. I didn't even have to tell it to look suspicious. It smelled the rot and highlighted the corpse. In a shared folder labeled Possible Anomalies Vendor Streamlining, because God forbid I name it evidence of malfeasance, I began quietly collecting files. Vendor packets, email chains, risk analysis reports. I tagged nothing dramatic, no red alerts, just silent, cautious diligence. The kind no one notices until it's too late. I also started printing hard copies. You laugh, but if you've ever watched a data breach turn a server room into a war zone, you know. Paper doesn't get wiped. One night, as I organized the files chronologically, I saw it. Ryan had altered the onboarding SOP himself. 3 clicks in our system, done without committee approval, flagged only by a changelog no one checks unless they're looking. Policy now read. Certain due diligence criteria may be deferred at VP discretion during periods of high acquisition volume. Legal hadn't approved that wording. Hell, legal didn't even know it was changed. I paused, just sat there in my chair, breathing in the faint, burnt smell of overheated toner and institutional betrayal. I wasn't scared, not yet, but something ancient stirred in me. That old compliance itch, same one that saved this company from a class action suit in 2014 and a privacy breach cover-up in 2019. That instinct doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispered now. This is how it starts. The first time I met Ryan, he was double-fisting cold brew and charisma like some kind of Silicon Valley missionary sent to bless us with buzzwords and dental veneers. He walked into the Monday exec meeting 10 minutes late, called the intern buddy, and opened with, "Let's talk growth velocity. Who's ready to break stuff?" I knew right then, we were screwed. He wore a blazer like it owed him money and sneakers that cost more than my monthly rent. Ryan was the kind of guy who spoke in LinkedIn hashtags and ended sentences with, "You feel me?" Even when no one did. He used the word disruption to describe internal reorgs and frictionless onboarding like it was a biblical commandment, not a regulatory minefield. By Tuesday, renamed our compliance operations deck to Risk Flexibility Matrix. By Wednesday, he'd removed the 7-day legal hold on contract approvals, called it unnecessary latency. By Thursday, he was CCing the CEO on Slack threads labeled Dana's bottlenecks. Subtle. I sent 3 memos that week. Professional, calm, data-supported. I outlined what his changes would mean for vendor accountability, flagged the missing certifications again, even suggested a half-day workshop so he could understand our baseline protocols. Not a single reply. The next week, my recurring Thursday check-in was mysteriously canceled until further notice. My name started vanishing from key emails. New initiatives were being presented by people who didn't even know how to read a vendor disclosure log. When I popped into a meeting I used to lead, I got the polite version of a "what are you doing here?" stare. "Oh, we're good, thanks" smile, cool. I cornered Greg, my manager, the human shrug, outside the kitchenette. He was mid-stir in his mug of decaf when I asked, "So am I just not on these calls anymore?" He winced. "Ryan's just streamlining workflows, wants to empower teams with more agility. Great. Maybe we could cartwheel through the next audit." By Friday, I realized what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not growing pains. A full-on sidelining. Ryan didn't want friction. He wanted obedience. He saw compliance as a hurdle, not a guardrail. But here's the kicker. I wasn't mad. Not then. I was clinical, focused. You don't survive almost 2 decades in corporate without learning to spot the storm before it breaks. And Ryan, he was the lightning, all flash, no grounding. Meanwhile, the systems he was optimizing were bleeding data integrity like a gut-shot deer, and our onboarding forms now auto-approved with only one sign-off. Supplier assessments were marked optional during scale mode. Our internal audit flagging tool downgraded to advisory only. He called it lean. I called it Exhibit A. Still, I said nothing. No dramatic protest, no Slack rants. I watched, I archived, I dated everything. Isolation has a funny way of sharpening your instincts. When no one's watching you, you start seeing everything, every skipped step, every misrouted contract, every damn file that should have gone through 3 departments but instead zipped into final approval with Ryan's digital signature and a little smiling emoji. He wasn't just breaking protocol. He was manufacturing liability. But hey, he looked great doing it. Got a standing ovation after his first growth sync. The board adored him. The CEO laughed at his jokes, and I sat in my corner, unseen but unblinking, quiet while the fuse burned down to the powder. The quarterly board meeting was held in Conference Room A, where the thermostat was always set to meet locker, and the air smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and ambition. 12 leather chairs, 1 absurd mahogany table, a $1 million view of the skyline, and me, sitting in silence with my binder, invisible as always. Ryan strolled in 5 minutes late, of course, sipping something in a branded Yeti and wearing that grin like he'd just sold moon rocks to NASA. The board loved him. He'd hit his KPIs, vendor acquisition was up, onboarding speed was record-breaking, and not a single audit had landed yet. Yet, I wasn't even supposed to be in the room. But legal had asked for a quick compliance update at the tail end of the agenda, 2 minutes tops, probably so they could check a box and feel responsible. I'd prepared a calm, clear summary. No drama, no accusations, just facts, 3 slides, audit trail degradation, certification gaps in 18 new vendors, policy changes that hadn't gone through governance review. I got exactly 6 words in, "We've noticed a trend in," and then Ryan laughed, actually laughed. Full volume, theater quality, cut me off cackle. "Oh my God, Dana," he said, shaking his head. "You're still on this." Looked around the room like we were all at some improv show. She's been sending these apocalypse memos for weeks. Vendor risk, paper trails, like it's 2012. A few board members chuckled. One of them muttered something that sounded like old school. My stomach clenched. "I mean, look," Ryan continued, walking to the head of the table like it was his living room. "If Dana had her way, we'd still be faxing contracts and filing things in color-coded binders." Gestured toward me, then winked. "No offense. No offense." I sat frozen. My hands were still on the binder I'd brought, the one I'd tabbed and cross-referenced and triple-checked, the one holding every piece of evidence we'd need when this whole circus went sideways. The CEO said nothing, not a word, just looked at his phone, then moved on to the next agenda item, vendor onboarding metrics. I took the floor and started talking about efficiency thresholds and platform agility. He even dropped a graph. The room nodded like a damn bobblehead convention. I didn't speak again. I sat through the rest of that meeting like a statue in a power suit. My cheeks burned so hot I could barely hear over the rush in my ears. Not from shame, from rage. Rage, perfectly hidden behind pressed lips and lowered eyes. The kind of rage that doesn't scream, kind that starts building blueprints. I walked out of that room with my binder unopened and my dignity bleeding quietly under my heels. But something else walked out with me too, something cold and final. That was the day I stopped trying to fix it from the inside. No more memos, no more polite warnings, no more giving men like Ryan the benefit of the doubt while they weaponized charm and ignorance against the truth. That day, I started planning, opened a secure folder on my personal encrypted drive, named it Protocol 0. Inside it, I began laying bricks, audit logs, vendor timelines, screenshot folders, change control entries. I timestamped everything. I documented who had access to what and when. I downloaded the SOP with Ryan's unauthorized changes and highlighted the edit history. I backed it all up to a flash drive I kept under a fake bottom in my desk drawer, right beneath a half-eaten pack of cinnamon gum. And I wrote myself a single sticky note, taped under my keyboard where no one could see it. They won't listen now, but they will. The next morning, I arrived at the office 2 hours early. No makeup, no heels, just flat shoes and wore eyes. The building lights hadn't even flicked on yet. Security buzzed me in with a nod. The guy didn't know my name, but he knew my routine. I was always early. Today, strategically early. First order of business, dig. Quietly, thoroughly, and without triggering the tech guy's paranoia radar. I started pulling vendor packets, old ones, new ones, and the ones Ryan's team had streamlined. I used the legacy dashboard, which was clunky but beautiful in one vital way. It tracked metadata like a mother. If a form was opened, edited, or deleted, it logged it. And unlike Ryan's shiny new vendor portal, it didn't lie. By noon, it already uncovered 5 instances where onboarding dates were backdated to appear compliant. The timestamps told a different story, forms created days after deals were signed, with placeholder files uploaded to mimic missing documents. It wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. I took screenshots. I printed copies, color-coded, tabbed, and indexed. I saved digital files to a high-security encrypted flash drive approved for off-network compliance use. IT signed off with a shrug. If you're backing up old SOP stuff, cool, sure, old SOP stuff. I also uploaded everything to a private cloud drive. Different password, different recovery email, just in case. Next came email chains. I went hunting for Ryan's digital fingerprints. Turns out, his genius idea of frictionless onboarding came with a trail of half-baked Slack threads, and let's just fast-track this replies. Even written compliance is slowing us down in a message to procurement. I screenshotted it, twice, but I wasn't looking for one smoking gun. I wanted the whole armory. Each day I arrived early, left late, ate lunch at my desk. My inbox filled with meeting invites I ignored. Ryan's people had fully written me off, and that was their mistake. They thought silence meant surrender. In truth, I was building the equivalent of a quiet missile silo under their feet. I started organizing the paper trail into volumes. Literally. 3-inch binders with dividers. Vendor timeline policy changes access logs regulatory, comparisons executive sign-offs, or lack thereof, each tabbed, labeled, and cross-referenced. I even printed hard copies of Ryan's Slack messages, formatted like deposition transcripts. It looked like the court scene from a John Grisham movie by the time I was done. Then, on a foggy Saturday morning, drove to my sister's house 2 towns over and slid the binders into a sealed plastic bin in her basement, right next to a crate of Christmas decorations. She didn't ask what was inside. She just raised an eyebrow and said, "You good?" I nodded. Not yet, but I will be. By the 3rd week, my emotional palette had boiled itself down to one clean color, precision. I didn't waste time being angry. I didn't fantasize about revenge or vindication. Didn't even imagine the look on Ryan's face when the hammer dropped. I just focused on building an airtight file, not just for what he'd done, but for when he'd been warned. For every moment someone chose speed over law, optics over safety, charm over truth. I started drafting a memo, not to Ryan, not to Greg, but to the CEO himself. It was 6 pages long, bullet-pointed, laced with quiet fury and statutory references. I didn't send it, not yet, because something was coming. Something I could feel in my bones. The kind of shift you can't quite name, but you prepare for like a storm you smell before you see. And when it came, I would be ready. Not with anger, not with noise, but with a binder and a smile. Subject: Compliance Concerns Re. Third-party vendor vetting procedures sent, Wednesday, 6:08 a.m. to Ryan McConnell, BCC. Elaine Harper, Internal Legal Counsel. Hi, Ryan. I wanted to formally document some escalating concerns regarding recent deviations from our standard third-party onboarding protocols. Specifically, I've observed patterns of vendor approvals lacking the required compliance certifications, inconsistent audit trail entries, and instances of documentation being uploaded or amended post-contract execution. As you know, Section 302B of our regulatory obligations under the Federal Vendor Integrity Act, FVIA, companies are required to maintain accurate and complete due diligence records prior to engaging third-party service providers. Failing to adhere to these protocols, even unintentionally, can result in violations, penalties, or worse, regulatory blacklisting. I've outlined key examples in the attached document, with timestamps, affected vendors, policy citations. My recommendation remains to initiate a limited scope audit of all new vendors onboarded since policy Rev 7.2 was implemented. Let me know how you'd like to proceed. Best, Dana Carlton, Senior Compliance Analyst. I didn't reread it, didn't pace around or overthink the tone. Just attached the file, clicked send, and quietly took a sip of coffee like I was sealing a time capsule. It wasn't a cry for help, wasn't a plea. It was a kill switch, documented, polite, and undeniably on the record. The BCC to legal ensured it couldn't vanish. The metadata was there. The server log showed the timestamp, and the document, 6 vendor examples, policy numbers, and citations. Evidence. Neatly packaged, he replied 27 minutes later. No greeting, no punctuation. Thanks for the bedtime story. Appreciate the passion, lol. Lowercase. Lol. I stared at the screen for a full minute before I smiled. That email, more than anything else, sealed it. A VP dismissing documented compliance flags with sarcasm, while legal watched from the shadows. His reply wasn't just negligent, it was radioactive. I copied his response into a separate file labeled Exhibit C Disregard of Formal Compliance Warnings, even included the server log that verified he opened the attachment, but spent less than 10 seconds on the page. You can't fake read time, not when you know where to look. By that afternoon, I had printed the thread and slotted it into the binder under the tab marked Final Warning Sent. The ink was barely dry. Something shifted in me after that email. A kind of resignation, not defeat, not anger, just clarity. I wasn't going to fix this with another memo. I wasn't going to save the company by begging decision-makers who couldn't tell a red flag from a rose bouquet. I had built the paper trail. I had followed every protocol. And now, it was just a matter of time. You ever seen a fuse burn down in slow motion? That's what it felt like. The silence after that email was louder than a boardroom. No follow-up, no questions. Just another Friday all hands where Ryan shouted, "Let's crush Q3," offered bonuses for anyone who onboarded 5 vendors by month end. No mention of vetting, no mention of risk, so I waited, binder growing heavier, inbox growing quieter. And somewhere, out there in the land of federal oversight, I prayed for one curious regulator to look a little too closely. Because when they did, I'd be holding a flashlight, a receipt, and a map to the bodies. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper, raised seal in the top left corner, landed on the CEO's desk via overnight courier, not email, not Slack, not some cheery intern. Physical, serious, the kind of thing you don't just skim between Zoom calls. I didn't see it arrive, but I heard about it within hours because panic spreads faster than memos. Federal Office of Vendor Integrity Compliance had sent an official request. Please provide documentation outlining third-party vendor onboarding protocols, as revised under policy Rev 7.2, with examples of application to vendors #341 through #350. 10 vendors, all of them flagged in my binder. All of them approved under Ryan's frictionless initiative, all of them missing at least one legally required certification. Ryan called it a routine inquiry in the Monday leadership meeting. Just a checkbox thing, he said, sipping his canned cold brew. They send these out all the time. We'll respond, show our growth metrics, and they'll move on. No one looked convinced. The CEO raised an eyebrow. Do we have all the requested documentation ready? Almost there, Ryan replied, a little too quickly. I just need to aggregate a few files. Consolidate, which was code for I'm scrambling like a raccoon in a dumpster fire. I said nothing. Just sat at the edge of the room, technically there to provide supporting materials if needed. I opened a yellow notepad and wrote 2 things. The date, the name of the regulator printed on the letterhead, then I just waited. For the next 2 days, Ryan buried himself in conference calls. He saw his assistant running between departments with that panicked toddler energy, the kind that only shows up when someone's trying to build documents that should already exist. Greg pinged me in Slack once. Hey, any idea where the original vendor approval docs are stored for the inquiry batch? I typed, then deleted, then retyped, then finally sent. They should be in the compliance archive. Assuming the new workflows were followed, I attached no files, offered no rescue line. If Ryan wanted to play captain, he could go down with the ship he built. By Wednesday, legal was hovering. I passed Elaine, our internal counsel, in the break room. She was gripping a file folder like it owed her child support. Her eyes flicked up to me. "You didn't happen to archive any of the vendor data before the policy changes, did you?" I sipped my coffee. "I archive everything." She nodded, didn't smile, didn't ask for access. Just walked. The tension in the office shifted. You could feel it, like the air before a thunderstorm. People started using headphones at their desks not for music, but to avoid eye contact. Ryan got snippy in stand-ups, called someone overcautious for asking about compliance checkboxes. I caught him whispering in a stairwell to someone in procurement. He was asking if the missing forms could be reconstructed, if we know what they should have said. You ever seen a man try to forge time? It's not graceful. Then Thursday morning, the CEO's assistant scheduled a full exec briefing. Everyone was to attend. No optional RSVPs. No vague swing by if you can. It was booked under one word: regulator. That's when I knew the trap was live, not set live. The regulator had touched the wire. Ryan was now the only thing standing between inquiry and investigation. And I sat at my desk, binder in my lap, tabs perfectly aligned, each 14 circled in red. Every warning preserved, every timestamp verifiable, every ignored memo about to become a monument. I didn't smile, didn't rehearse. I just waited for the question I knew was coming. The one Ryan couldn't answer. The one that would burn through his buzzwords like acid. And when it came, I'd be ready. No panic, no performance, just paper and precision. The conference room was packed wall to wall with silence. Phones face down. Laptops open, but untouched. No one sipping coffee. No one adjusting their ties or crossing their legs with the usual fidgety executive flair. Just stillness, like the air knew what was coming before we did. The TV on the far wall flickered to life. A Zoom window opened to reveal a woman with steel gray hair, thin-rimmed glasses, and the kind of unblinking stare you get when your entire career is built on spotting bullshit at 20 paces. Her name was Valerie Henson, Senior Compliance Investigator, Federal Office of Vendor Integrity. Her voice was calm, clipped, and devastating. "Thank you for having me," she began. "I'll keep this brief. We're following up on our previous request regarding third-party vendor documentation. We'd just like to confirm a few items." Ryan leaned forward, all charm and synthetic confidence. "Of course, Valerie. Happy to help." She didn't smile. "Let's start with vendor hash 347, she said, reading directly from her notes. "Can you provide documentation of their compliance certification at the time of onboarding?" Ryan froze. It wasn't obvious at first. To most of the room, it probably looked like he was just being thoughtful, calculating his words, maybe mentally scanning a file directory. But I saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the half-breath that caught in his throat, the fingers tapping the side of his Yeti cup, faster now. "Well," he said, dragging out the word like it might grow a lifeline if he gave it enough room. "Vendor hash 347 was part of our fast-track vendor acceleration pilot, so documentation may have been finalized post-engagement, but within the acceptable risk parameters outlined in." Valerie cut him off. Politely, surgically. "Just to clarify, is there, or is there not, a compliance certification on file dated prior to onboarding?" Ryan opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at the tablet in front of him, swiped again. Silence. The board members started shifting, subtle movements. One cleared his throat. Another scribbled something in a notebook they hadn't touched until now. The CEO's eyes were locked on Ryan like he'd just watched someone fart during a funeral. I sat still, stone-faced, not blinking, because the answer was no. The document didn't exist. Not digitally. Not physically. Not in any shared drive or Slack thread or secret subfolder labeled final, really final vendor docs. Because Ryan had skipped it, overruled it, called it bureaucratic friction, and waved it away like it was optional fine print. Valerie waited exactly 6 seconds. Then she asked again, "Mr. McConnell, yes or no?" Ryan inhaled. "At this time, I don't have that document readily accessible." "Not readily accessible," she repeated, typing something. "Understood?" That was when it happened. That microscopic shift in the power dynamic. The kind you can feel in your bones before anyone says it out loud. The CEO turned in his chair, just slightly, toward me. I didn't move, didn't offer help. I wasn't going to save him. I wasn't going to break the silence. My job had been done 6 weeks ago when I hit send on that email, attached the memo, archived everything like a mortician preparing for a wake no one believed was coming. Ryan cleared his throat. Look, we have robust protocols. There may have been transitional hiccups during the rollout. Valerie raised a single eyebrow. You implemented a new policy revision that allowed for vendor onboarding prior to compliance documentation. Well, it was an efficiency initiative, so that's a yes. He froze again. The silence in the room was now thick enough to chew. Somewhere near the door, someone's phone vibrated quietly. No one dared check it. The board was watching now, really watching, not nodding along, not chuckling at his buzzwords, just staring, and seeing for the first time that there was no depth beneath Ryan's shine, just a shallow pool of gloss and ego now draining fast under federal scrutiny. The trap had sprung, but it wasn't loud. It didn't snap like a bear trap in a cartoon. It hissed, slow, precise, inescapable. I sat there, binder closed in my lap, waiting for the moment they'd finally ask the only question that mattered, the one that would flip the whole room on its axis. But that came next. For a moment, no one spoke. Not Ryan, not the board, not even Valerie, who just sat there on the screen like a marble bust with a federal badge. The hum of the AC kicked on, loud in the vacuum Ryan had created with his incompetence and stammering. The CEO leaned back in his chair, slowly folded his hands, tapped his thumbs together like he was kneading invisible dough made of disappointment. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared straight ahead, not even at Ryan, more like through him. Then he turned, not dramatically, not with flair, just a smooth pivot of the neck like he'd finally reached the next name on his mental checklist. Dana, he said, voice calm, clipped. Do you have the documentation? The entire room shifted. Dozens of heads snapped toward me. The woman who hadn't spoken in 3 weeks of meetings, the ghost in the machine, the compliance statue they'd left in the corner and forgotten. I didn't say a word. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out the binder. The one with the red tab labeled #347, the one I'd backed up 5 different ways and stored in 2 separate zip codes. I placed it on the table. Clean, crisp, witty in that way that only truth can be. The CEO looked at it. I slid it forward. Page 14, sir. He opened it, glanced down, one breath in, one breath out, the signatures, the missing certification, the timestamp, the flagged email chain, my original memo dated, delivered, and ignored. He didn't ask another question. He didn't look at Ryan. He didn't look at the board. He just closed the binder, turned his gaze back to the screen, and said flatly to Valerie, I'll be sending you a full documentation packet, courtesy of Miss Carlton. Apologies for the confusion. Valerie nodded once. Expression unchanged, appreciated. Then the CEO turned to Ryan. Clean out your office. That was it. Not a raised voice. Not a dramatic outburst. No righteous monologue about integrity or ethics or fiduciary duty. Just the dull, surgical sound of a career being terminated in real time. Ryan blinked like he hadn't understood the words. Wait, I think you're fired, the CEO repeated, still not raising his voice. Now, a security badge holder appeared at the doorway. A man in a suit, quiet, professional. Ryan looked around like someone might stand up for him. The board members looked at their notes. One took a sip of water. Another reached for a pen that didn't need picking up. No one moved. No one saved him. As Ryan stood, slow, mechanical, I caught one last glimpse of his face. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even embarrassment. It was confusion. Like he still believed his charm would override reality. Like he couldn't quite compute that the same room that once laughed at his jokes was now watching him vanish like a ghost no one liked. He left without another word. Valerie gave the briefest of nods and disconnected. The screen blinked black. The meeting, such as it was, dissolved in an awkward fog. No one really knew what to do next, so they sat there, quiet, shifting in their chairs, realizing what had just happened. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just sat still. Binder back in my lap. Tabs pristine. Mission complete. For the first time in months, no one was talking over me. No one was streamlining the truth. And the only sound in the room was the soft, glorious echo of Ryan's chair rolling away for the last time. It was 3 days later, early morning. Elevator ride. Just me, the CEO, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. We hadn't spoken since the meeting. He hadn't needed to. Ryan was gone. The regulator had been sent the binder. Legal confirmed no further investigation pending. We stood side by side in silence, floor numbers blinking past like Morse code. As we reached the executive level, he didn't look at me. Just said, soft, almost tired, thank you. 2 words. No speech. No handshake, just that. Like a breath he'd been holding finally let out. I nodded. You're welcome, sir. He stepped off, doors closed, that was it. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from HR. Subject line, role transition details effective immediately. No fanfare, no big announcement. But my login now opened new dashboards. I had approval access Ryan used to wield like a child with scissors. My nameplate was swapped out on the third floor. No one said the word promotion. But my office now had a window. The board didn't apologize, of course not. They congratulated me with their silence, leaned forward during briefings, read every slide I presented, and didn't interrupt once. That was enough. I didn't throw a party, didn't update my LinkedIn. Just moved in slow and steady, box by box, binder by binder. And when I unpacked the last of my things, hung one item dead center on the back wall, a framed printout of the original memo. The one I sent to Ryan. The one he replied to with thanks for the bedtime story lol. It was dated, titled, highlighted, a monument to quiet preparation. A reminder for them, for me, for whoever sat in that chair next, that compliance isn't optional. That warnings, ignored, don't evaporate. They calcify, they wait, and they speak when it counts. I sat at my desk, leaned back, binder in reach, systems running clean. No fireworks, no applause, just order. And the peace of knowing they finally heard the voice I never had to raise. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.